The G5 Hive. All G5, all the time.
Welcome to episode number 21 of the G5 Hive, where we aim to bring you all the honey from G5 college football. I am Justice, joined by my co-host Luke. How you doing tonight, Luke? Other than being cold.
Yeah, trying to stay warm. Here in Muscatine, Iowa. We've got -8. Yeah, I mean, granted, it's 9:15 Central Time. But yeah, it's been pretty cold lately, and my kids have school canceled tomorrow because it's supposed to be cold as balls tomorrow again. So it's been the last week. It's been very Christmas-like for being after the holidays. How about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I got to enjoy some have fun in the snow last week, skiing. But I'm back home, and it's not cold. It's not very cold here, and no snow here like you got. But maybe we'll get some this year.
We probably got about 2.5 feet of snow or so. Snow blower. I got a tractor with a snow blower attached to the front of it. It's
nice.
So it does. It only takes me about 45 minutes to snow blow. Still takes a while with a tractor and a snowblower on it. So
was better than hand shoveling. I gotta imagine.
Way better for sure.
I don't really have much need for a snowblower, and I only ever used one time. I was up at a friend's house in Pennsylvania, and it snowed while I was there, and so he shoveled, and I was using his blower, and I thought it'd be like cake, right? But I mean, it's not as easy as one would think if you've never done it. Is it easier than shoveling? Sure, but I was amazed. It still work.
Yeah. Yep. Sitting on a tractor night, not too bad. You just sit there and just kind of drive wherever and throw snow.
Well, hopefully everyone got to check out our interview last week with Texas State running back Ismail Mahdi. If you haven't had the opportunity to check that out, I would encourage you to go check that out. It's available on YouTube. It's available in podcast form on Apple, Spotify, and Google. Until Google, I guess, goes off. I guess was it April, but
April 2nd or April 4th, something like that. Hopefully, GJ Kenny doesn't leave for the Arizona job because if he leaves, I bet you. By the way, Ishmael talked. I bet you Ishmael would follow him to Arizona.
Yeah, I would imagine he would follow him. Be kind of funny if Jaden Delore went back to Arizona to follow Kenny. But
that's news today.
We don't want that. We don't want to put that juju on the G5, man. We like to see him keep Kenny at least for another year or so. But yeah, if you haven't checked out that interview, go check it out. Mahdi's a great kid. We asked him for some breakout players to look forward to this coming season, and he didn't disappoint. He provided us with some names, so I'm not gonna share those names again. But if you want to hear them, go check it out. Go check the interview out with Mahdi, and give us a like, subscribe, review, YouTube, or wherever you listen to us on podcast form. I guess the last live episode was right before the Natty. And that was kind of our last game where we picked for the Justice versus Luke Bowl Challenge. Michigan was favored by 4.5. Luke took Michigan. I was contrarian and took Washington, and Luke pulled off the win in the Natty. Congrats to any Michigan Wolverine fans. The results of our bowl pick'ems, I ended up exactly at 500, 21-21. Luke ended up 17-25, and the G5 versus the P5 was 2-7. Hopefully, no one listened to us for betting advice. I think we both kind of put it out there. We're not great at betting, we don't do it. So yeah, don't listen to us for betting advice. you're gonna listen to us,
Plus,
fantasy advice is where it's at, not betting advice.
plus it's hard. You got the bowl games. You don't. You hear. What's his name there? Who just took over at Auburn 2 years ago or last year? I mean,
Hugh Freeze.
Freeze talking about how he's let his coaches do the prep work for the bowl. He's trying to get kids in here and there. So you don't know what teams are coaching, which aren't. You can kind of get an idea, I think, based off of what kids are maybe getting surgeries done and how important they were. Because then you can say the coaching staff's like, hey, get your body ready for this, spring practice, things like that. Get you a couple more weeks. You can kind of maybe get a little bit of insight from there, but then also kind of what bowl you go to. Are you going to a bowl that the nightlife might be a little bit more intriguing than other bowls, and what teams are there for business and which their teams are there to party? You look at Boston College and Syracuse. Maybe one of those teams took the bowl game a little bit more seriously than the other. Maybe one of those teams stayed out quite a bit later than the other. I don't know, but
and you got
things that are all wild cards.
Yeah, the portal, like, it's another wild card because some teams let their portal players play, other teams don't let them play. You get a mixed bag there. Then you get like a situation like Minnesota where they got to pay NIL money to a quarterback just to have a quarterback for the game.
Honestly, like, I don't know why they even paid a quarterback. Just run a wildcat and just
wildcat.
I mean,
yes.
Yeah, you just had Darius Taylor run the ball all the time anyway, so
right.
might as well just
just hike it to him and let him go.
Yeah.
All right. So this is kind of, I didn't think about this till now, but this is kind of probably the last show where we're really kind of looking backwards and looking at G5 college football this past season. Starting next week, we'll kind of be looking forward, looking at the portal stuff and some coaching changes. But this week we figured we'd do our all-conference teams for the G5. We're going to do them in alphabetical order. We're going to have one quarterback, two running backs, three receivers, and a tight end. And Luke and I will alternate. We'll go through our teams. We'll alternate who goes first. So we're going to start off with the American Athletic Conference. At quarterback, I chose Byron Brown from South Florida. He was a top fantasy option in the G5, in all of college fantasy, not just the G5. At running back, it pains me to say this because I sure wish he would have stayed at Old Dominion. But when he was healthy and he played, Blake Watson at Memphis was just a stud, both for Memphis and for college fantasy football owners. Jermaine Brown Jr. at UAB. Once Isaiah Jacobs got hurt and he kind of took on more of the load, he took off for fantasy owners, and he had wide receiver and running back eligibility, but for our purposes, count him as a running back. Moving on to receivers, one of the top receivers in the country, regardless of G5 or P5, and that was LeJontay Wester, Florida Atlantic. Unfortunately for us in the G5, he has taken his talents to the Power 5 and moved to Colorado. But even after Casey Thompson went down and Daniel Richardson was a starting quarterback, LeJontay Wester just continued to produce on a weekly basis, as a top option for your fantasy teams. Then I had Luke McCaffrey at Rice. I feel like he did a little bit better. He was better when JT Daniels was the quarterback. After kind of JT Daniels got hurt, McCaffrey didn't necessarily produce as we'd have liked, but he still had an outstanding year. And then my last receiver was Josh Cephas from UTSA. With the injuries at receiver for UTSA with DeCorian Clark, Cephas kind of took on a bigger role, bigger load for them, and it was a fairly consistent producer. And then at tight end, I went with R.J. Maryland at SMU. I think there was, a couple other tight ends you could have chosen, and Luke took a different one as well. and the main reason I took R.J. Maryland is just from a touchdown standpoint, he and Preston Stone seem to have a fairly good connection. So that was my all conference team for the American, and I'll turn it over to Luke to talk about his team.
All right, quarterback. I had Seth Hennigan for Memphis. Running back Blake Watson from Memphis. Running back Jermaine Brown Jr. UAB. Wide receiver LeJontay Wester FAU. Second wide receiver Joshua Cephas UTSA. Wide receiver 3 Sean Atkins South Florida, and tight end David Martin Robinson at a Temple. So a couple differences I had from you. Put Seth Hennigan in at quarterback. Byron Brown was great through the air and running the ball. But he had a lot, like I was a Byron Brown owner in some leagues, and it felt uncomfortable starting him some weeks. And when you did, like, I don't know, it was this roller coaster, but it seemed like Seth Hennigan really gave you consistency. He never really botched 2 weeks. He was probably his lowest game in a 6-point passing touchdown league. I think was like 20.2 points or something like that. And then he had a couple boom games. His boom games were not like Byron Brown's boom games, but they moved quick, and he led the American in passing yards, and then had 32 touchdowns and only 9 interceptions. So Byron Brown had 11 interceptions, but it felt like 400 sometimes when you were watching it. It just, I don't know, that offense just didn't seem to click all the time. I'm really looking forward to USF next year, but consistency was the main thing. I went there with Seth Hennigan. But then you look at South Florida wide receiver Sean Atkins. He was second in the league in the American in receptions, fourth in yards, and tied for fifth in touchdowns. He had 92 receptions for 1,054 yards and 7 touchdowns. And the end of the season, your playoff stretch, 7 receptions for 102, 3 receptions for 49 and a touchdown. And then 2 for 31, a dud there in the championship. But it's 15.8, 20.2, and then 5.3 points. I don't think a lot of people had a lot of Sean Atkins. I believe he's back next year. Will be a top name, I think, to have, mid rounds on supplementals. But yeah, I big fan of Sean Atkins. And then tight end was David Martin Robinson. And sorry, those end of season playoffs were for David Martin Robinson. He had 7 for 102, 3 for 49 touchdown, 2 for 31. So 15.8, 20.2, and 5.3 from a tight end in the playoffs, like 5.3. When you're going up against other teams, there's only a handful of tight ends that really are going to be game breakers. Brock Bowers in other leagues, was hurt. I think he would have missed the game. So there weren't like a lot of tight ends that you're going up against other teams that don't have great tight ends. And 15.8, 20.2, and then 5.3 is probably not killing you in those. So that's why I went with David Martin Robinson. If there's anything you got to say, I'm going to look up Sean Atkins' stats here at the end because, he was solid all year.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of go through maybe some players that maybe we, may have we didn't include, but maybe should have, maybe would have been considered. When you look at quarterbacks in the American, I think, in my opinion, Brown and Hennigan were the top two. If I was going to consider anyone else, perhaps Chandler Rogers and Preston Stone. But, Rogers and Stone didn't play the whole year. Rogers in the beginning was, playing the quarterback shuffle there at North Texas, and then Stone got injured towards the end. Those are probably the only other two that you could have perhaps considered. But neither one of them really had a whole lot on the ground there. I think
I would
to me,
argue
like,
maybe uh,
yeah, but I mean,
he
like,
wasn't too
just
bad.
looking at his stats compared to the other two guys, or the other four. I mean, he's 6 touchdowns behind Brown through the air. Yards, he was right there, but he didn't necessarily, he was kind of lacking in the touchdowns.
Chandler
Uh,
Rogers would be my next pick.
yeah, me too. If I had to pick another guy,
So
um,
let me list off Sean Atkins, his playoff run here. 9 receptions, 169 yards, no touchdowns. 10 receptions for 92 yards, no touchdown. 7 receptions for 61 and a touchdown. 25.9, 19.2, 27.58. Solid numbers.
yeah.
He should be back next year, and I will want him on my team.
Looking at running backs, probably the biggest spot where I wish we would have had 3 instead of 2. And I think we both got the top 2 right, but unfortunately, we both left Mekhi Hughes off, who had a great year.
Led the league in rushing by about 200 yards. It was just the touchdowns. He didn't get those touchdowns.
So Mekhi Hughes is probably the one, the one other guy to consider here for running back. Looking at receiver, I would say maybe 2 guys that we could have considered. One being Jamori Macklin at North Texas, and the other guy being Rock Taylor at Memphis. Both had outstanding years. Unfortunately, Macklin is moving on to the Power 5 and Kentucky, but Rock Taylor does return to Memphis. Keep that connection going with Seth Hennigan.
Yep.
And then at tight end, I mean, those were the top 2 guys. There really wasn't anybody else, I think, to even consider a tight end in the American anyway.
Yeah, Bowden, is it Groen a Rice?
Yeah,
He's probably
Rice.
like the number 3 guy, but it is a teardrop, big tier.
So we'll move on to Conference USA, and Luke's going to lead us off here.
All right, give me a quick second here to get my notes changed over. All right, Conference USA quarterback Caden Salter, Liberty. Running back Quentin Cooley, Liberty. Malik Jackson, Jacksonville State. Wide receiver Malachi Corley, Western Kentucky. Chris Mitchell, Florida International. Noah Smith, Sam Houston. And tight end Holden Willis, Middle Tennessee State. I really liked Holden there because he's kind of that cheat code. Depends on the league that you're in if he's a tight end or a wide receiver. In a lot of leagues that I'm in, he was both. So he ended up being 8th in the league in receptions. He had 46 receptions for 697 yards and 5 touchdowns. But then, Chris Mitchell leads the league in receiving yards. Then Malachi Corley, he wasn't too far behind, but also just behind Noah Smith in reception. Oh, I guess they were tied at 79 apiece. Chris Mitchell just behind there at 64. Malachi Corley with the 11 touchdowns. That's a big get there. I am kind of concerned about what Western Kentucky looks like next year when you don't have a dude like Malachi Corley. While the quarterback play might not be too bad, I don't know what that receiving room really is going to look like. Noah Smith, I don't think anybody really paid a lot of attention to him. He was quiet, under the radar guy, but he was 79 for 783.
And he really came on strong in the second half, the back half of the season.
And
PPR monster.
Yep. So really, really liked him there. And then when it comes to rushing, I mean, Quentin Cooley was the league leader in rushing, followed by Salter. So when you have your quarterback as the number 2 rusher in the conference. No doubt there. Malik Jackson was the number 2 running back. Diego Pavia was the 3rd leading rusher, but yeah, Malik Jackson, and then he was able to catch a couple balls here and there to help in PPR. For me,
he got injured towards the end of the year, so but he was pretty. I feel like he was pretty consistent in the beginning, in the first half of the year, getting you double digit points. He wasn't going crazy, but he was getting you 10, 12 points a game.
So that is my Conference USA team.
So as you might imagine, in Conference USA, they're just me and Luke don't have a lot of variation here. I'll just spoil it. The only variation we have is tight end, and that's because I was looking at a league where Mr. Willis only had wide receiver eligibility when I was kind of making my list. But Caden Salter, quarterback, Liberty, running backs, same. Quentin Cooley at Liberty, Malik Jackson, Jacksonville State, same 3 receivers: Malachi Corley, Western Kentucky; Chris Mitchell, Florida; Noah Smith, Sam Houston State. And then I did go with a different tight end, simply because I was using a league and Fantrax to kind of develop my lists. And in this particular league, it's a primary position only league. So Holden Willis shows as a receiver and not a tight end. And I went with Sean Brown at Jacksonville State. If I had known Willis, we would have been exactly the same. If I had noticed, had even thought about, hey, Holden Willis is in there. But a little bit of variety, Sean Brown. But other than Holden Willis, there really wasn't any tight ends of substance here in Conference USA. Looking at other players that maybe had somewhat of a shot to make our all conference teams, I'd say quarterback. You could have made an argument for Diego Pavia at New Mexico State, but I mean Salter was just head and shoulders above everybody in terms of fantasy production, and they had the softest schedule in all of FBS football. At running back, there really wasn't anybody else to consider, in my opinion. Like you said, 2 quarterbacks were the number 2 and number 3 receivers for the or running backs for the conference. So
another quarterback I maybe would have it would have been a wild card, I think, but Zion Webb, he didn't throw many touchdowns.
Yeah,
he did rush a lot and had like 7 touchdowns on the ground. I think he had more rushing touchdowns than passing.
At the end of the year. He came on very strong at the end of the year. Once they kind of committed to him being the man for much of the season, it was a rotation with him and Smothers and them being healthy. And then at the end of the year, they kind of committed to Webb, and Webb did finish the year strong.
Yeah, running back, not Deion what was it? Deion Hankins would be maybe the running back I would bring up as that 3rd guy.
Looking at the receivers, I mean, I think we kind of nailed them. If I had to pick a next guy, it'd be CJ Daniels at Liberty.
Yeah.
He did have 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. Maybe one other guy to consider would have been Kelly Akarari at UTEP. To me, the problem with him is he's kind of a one-trick pony. He's your deep threat, and he's either going to catch 3 balls for 100 yards and a touchdown, or he's not going to do so much. He only had 48 receptions, but he did go over 1,000 yards for the year. Those kind of be the next 2 receivers. And the kind of the sad thing is even all 5 of them are gone. Corley's gone in the NFL. CJ Daniels, I guess CJ Daniels can't technically return. I don't think he's committed yet, but he's in the portal. Noah Smith's out of eligibility. Chris Mitchell has went to Notre Dame, and Kelly Akarari has gone to Mississippi State. So there'll be a whole new crop of receivers stepping up for Conference USA coming up. And then we already talked about tight end. There really isn't, other than Holden Willis and maybe Sean Brown. There really wasn't. Bentley Hanshaw at Liberty. But he was very touchdown dependent, which is kind of happens with all your tight ends. I did think of another tight end just now, and again, it would have been dependent upon your league, and that's Dalvin Smith at Western Kentucky, wide receiver, tight end eligibility. Now he kind of disappeared and got hurt for a good portion of the year. But yeah, he would have been another tight end to consider, assuming your league allowed him to be a tight end. He did have 50 receptions, 513 yards for 6 touchdowns, and he had an awesome bowl game too. So I got to see that up close and personal. It'll be interesting to see if he maintains that tight end eligibility.
I also, from a fantasy standpoint, when it sucks when guys get injured, but to not play them. So you definitely know the games to play him and when not to play him, and he was one of those cheat codes if you were able to play him as a tight end.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll be even if he maintains the eligibility, he will be an even bigger cheat code this coming season. We were in the Campus to Canton Slack, the company Slack. We were talking about this, and I went back and looked at his PFF stats. And in this past season, he had 0 inline snaps. The previous year, he had 5 inline snaps, and then in 21, he had 31. So I don't think that's what Fantrax uses, but be interested to see if he maintains. I can't think of another. I mean, Holden Willis is probably the next best example, but I can't think of a previous example where a guy was a wide receiver, tight end, had really a wide receiver that had tight end eligibility and was kind of a cheat code, and how that was handled with Fantrax. All the examples I can think of were guys that were clearly running backs but had tight end eligibility. So like C.J. Donaldson the year before last, and then there was a guy at Marshall. His name's escaping me, but he was a tight end. They made him into a running back, and he had like 1,500 yards and 18 touchdowns. But you were able, for 1 year, in both those cases, you were able to use them at tight end. The next year, of course, they both became running backs within Fantrax. So I can't think of a example that would kind of fit the Holden Willis, Dalvin Smith mold in terms of how Fantrax kind of treated them. But
give me your MAC team here, Justice.
So my quarterback, man, there wasn't anyone like I really loved, but I felt like DeQuan Finn kind of stood out. He certainly, I don't think, had the year that many folks expected him to have, or had as good a year. But with Central Michigan kind of, playing around with Jace Bauer and Bert Emanuel in the beginning of the year, then you had Curtis Work didn't have a Curtis Work
talk about
season.
Disappointment.
DJ Irons gets hurt for Akron. I mean, DeQuan Finn is kind of really the only answer at quarterback for the MAC. Running back, there was a couple good options. I went with Penny Boone at Toledo, who, after the first couple of weeks kind of took over that backfield, had an outstanding year. Unfortunately, he's moved on to the Power 5. And the other running back was a redshirt freshman who kind of came out of nowhere, Jalen Buckley, Western Michigan. Look forward to seeing what he can do in that offense next year. At receiver, we were talking about this kind of before we start recording, and it was just kind of a mess. And you could have went a lot of different ways. I went with Krishan McCray at Kent State. When he was healthy and playing, he was outstanding. PPR monster. Another guy that was a PPR monster, played the whole year, Kenny Womack out of Western Michigan. And then this last guy, I was torn between this guy and actually the guy that the one that Luke took that was different. And I kind of took this guy just because he had some monster games, and I just wanted to highlight him. Unfortunately, he's also moving to the P5, and that's Gage Larverdane at Miami, Ohio. When he was healthy, and when Gabbert was healthy, they were a force. When Evian Smith kind of took over at quarterback, you saw Larverdane drop off as expected, just because Evian Smith's not a passer. It's not really a big part of his game. But Larverdane's going to be moving on to South Carolina, where I personally don't think I'll have any interest in him at all. But and then tight end, one of the top tight ends. He was slow. He was slow to get started, man, but he really took off at the end of the year.
Had a great bowl game too.
Yep, Harold Fannin Jr. at Bowling Green, definitely the top tight end in the MAC. So I will turn it over to you, Luke.
So, like you mentioned, this one was a hard one to fill out. I started filling out some stuff, and then I left the wide receivers positions open, and I saw like the names that you had, and I was really surprised to see Gage Larverdane in there. But then, like when I was digging into it, I'm like, well, he didn't do great, but
right.
My options aren't much better.
Yeah.
So quarterback, I also went with DeQuan Finn. From a fantasy standpoint, he was pretty consistent, but you didn't always feel confident starting him. You were definitely hoping he ran the ball in like once or twice a game, which he just happened to do quite a bit. I went with Penny Boone at running back, Jalen Buckley at Western Michigan, Jawan Newton at Toledo. He led the MAC in yards and fourth in receptions. He had 52 receptions for 696 yards and 9 touchdowns. So went him with wide receiver 1. Then Kenneth Womack for Western Michigan. PPR monster, running a lot of plays there at Western Michigan. Jalen Buckley, I put in over Ontario Brown just on the pure deal that he caught the ball more than Ontario Brown did. Ontario Brown definitely, you knew what he was gonna run the ball a lot, but he just wasn't gonna catch a lot. So he was second in the MAC in rushing behind Penny Boone. But yeah, I ended up going with Jalen Buckley due to that. And then Krishan McCray, again, fantasy football, you know when to start him, when to sit him. You probably didn't start him right away. Maybe after game 3, you put him in there. He performed, then he got hurt, and then you knew to not play him. And if you were depending on Krishan McCray as like your number 2 or 3 wide receiver, and you draft him as such, then then that sucks. But you weren't drafting him as such. Probably a late round flyer, and you got a couple games out of him. And then tight end went with Harold Fannin at a Bowling Green.
Looking at some players that maybe we could have included, really the only position I can make an argument for some other players is running back, and the two that stick out are Ontario Brown at Northern Illinois and Rashad Amos at Miami, Ohio.
Amos, he just came on at the end of the season.
Yeah.
He really wasn't doing stuff at the beginning, so that's why I would give it the nod to Ontario Brown being the next guy in. But he started killing it there towards the end of the season.
Yeah, those are really the only other 2 guys I think you could maybe make an argument for. Like we talked about quarterback and receiver and tight end. There really wasn't a whole lot of other options besides the guys that we included. All right, we'll move on to the Mountain West, and Luke's going to kick us off.
All right. Yeah, so Mountain West, quarterback, I went with Andrew Peasley, Wyoming. Mainly went his touchdown to interception, he had 25 touchdowns with 5 interceptions. He was 8th in passing yards, but he also added 419 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. So I thought that was good consistency from Andrew Peasley. Running back, is there any? I would put him as my running back 2 and my 1 and all of them. Ashton Genty with 1,347 yards rushing, 14 touchdowns. He was a beast. But another beast, Kyrie Robinson. He was good for a touchdown or 2 every single game. He was my RB2 for San Jose State. Wide receiver, Ricky White, UNLV. Then I was torn between Jalen Royals and I'm trying to think of the other guy there.
Terrell Vaughn.
Vaughn had the touchdowns, but they're not sticky. But Royals, I went with Royals, and then wide receiver 3, I went with Torrey Horton. He was first in receptions, second in yards, tied for 5th for touchdowns. He had 96 receptions, 1,136 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And then in your championship game, he drops 35.6 points. So he had about a 2 or 3 week stretch there where he hurt his hand. Not a lot of people knew about that. So he at least maybe that was Justice Simmons. Either way, Torrey Horton was hurt there in like a 2-3 game span. So, but yeah, he was my wide receiver 3, and then tight end. I mean, was there a question? It's Dallin Holker, Colorado State.
Yeah. So we have a little bit different, not too many. Really, the only difference, I guess, is quarterback and one of our receivers. Quarterback to me was just, I don't know. It was like a kind of a crapshoot. Yeah, it wasn't like anyone like really stood out head and shoulders above the others. I went with Braden Shager at Hawaii, who led the conference in passing yards and passing touchdowns. But I think you could have probably made a case for 5 quarterbacks to be on your all conference team.
I had a lot of Braden Shager, and it again was one of those things where it's like, all right, I play him, he got me like 2 points, and then I don't play him, and then he gets like 30 points. But like, you don't want to watch any of the first half. It's kind of like Byron Brown. It was like you don't want to watch any of the game, just see what the fantasy points are at the end.
At running back, I agreed with Luke. With Ashton Genty, Boise State, Kyrie Robinson, San Jose State. Receiver, 2 receivers we had the same: Jalen Royals, Utah State, Ricky White at UNLV, and then I went with Pafoli Ashlock at Hawaii, the number 1 receiver for that offense in Hawaii. He was fairly consistent week in, week out. He pulling up his stats now. He ended up with 83 catches, 832 yards, and 9 touchdowns. There was, other than there was, Torrey Horton, certainly someone I considered. There's probably 2 other guys. I feel like maybe 1 or 2 that you also could have considered. And then at tight end, Dallin Holker, right? It wasn't even close. And there were other serviceable tight ends. Trey Watson at Fresno, Mark Redmond at San Diego State, but Holker doubled them all.
64
points, yards,
receptions.
Yeah. Holker was head and shoulders the best tight end. Going back to quarterback, I think some other quarterbacks you could have considered: Chevin Cordero at San Jose State, Braden Fowler Nicolosi at Colorado State, and he may have been the one had he been the starter all year, and not taken over after the first couple games. And then Mikey Keene had a great year for Fresno State, but unfortunately had a couple injuries, so he missed a couple games. Other running backs, probably the biggest one would have been Ja'Cory Merritt at New Mexico.
17 touchdowns.
Malik Sherrod. Malik Sherrod had a great year too. But again, he kind of came on after the first, I don't know, 4 weeks or so. He got injured early on, and then he was splitting carries with Elijah Gilliam before he kind of took over that backfield. And then at receiver, probably the biggest one that neither one of us included was Terrell Vaughn, Utah State. Kind of got overshadowed, I feel like, by Jalen Royals as the season went on, but Terrell Vaughn had an outstanding year as well. Ricky White, we don't know what he's doing, right? We don't know if he's returning to UNLV or what. Jalen Royals is returning.
Says he doesn't. His dad says he doesn't, get any NIL money, and Notre Dame is not giving him any NIL money. Ricky White's dad has been pretty comical on the X or Twitter, because there's several things out there saying, UNLV is trying to collect as much money as they can and give it to the Ricky White Foundation.
Jalen Royals, we know he's returning to Utah State. Torrey Horton is returning to Colorado State. Terrell Vaughn is out of eligibility, and Foley Ashlock is returning to Hawaii. So most of these guys will return for next year. And then,
what are your thoughts of next year? Looking forward a little bit to next year. What do you think of Ricky White? He stays at UNLV. Who's the quarterback?
That's the question, right? I feel like they got somebody in the portal like today or yesterday.
Okay. Oh yeah, they got was it the Holy Cross quarterback? Is that right?
Yes. Matt Saluka?
Yeah.
Yes, that's who it is. They got him in the portal today. So that makes me feel a lot better about Ricky White, right? That they have someone to get the ball to him. Ashlock, Horton, Royals. Royals, man, like, is Royals going to go nuclear, or is someone else going to step up? Like, I can see Micah Davis kind of stepping up in that wide receiver 2 role there for Utah State. And then at tight end, Dallin Holker's gone to the NFL. Trey Watson and Mark Redmond, the other two that I did mention, they're both gone to the Power 5. Trey Watson, Texas A&M. Mark Redmond at Louisville. So, yeah. Be interesting. I guess John Michael Gillenborg at Wyoming's probably or Sam Olsen, San Jose State, kind of the next two up there at tight end for the Mountain West. Be interesting to see if Colorado State has another tight end on the roster that can even do half of what Dallin Holker did, right? Or if they get someone in the portal.
I'm sure they'll find somebody. It's almost coming into like that G5 tight end U there for tight ends.
Yes, the Norvell system. All right, on to our last conference, and that is the Sun Belt. At quarterback, I had Jordan McLeod at James Madison. Running back, Kamani Vidal, Troy. Ishmael Mahdi at Texas State. Wide receivers. That's right, friend of the show. Colin Lacey, South Alabama. Elijah Surratt at James Madison. And Caleb Hood at Georgia Southern. At tight end, man, it was slim pickings. There wasn't anyone that to me like really stood out above the rest. But I did go with the hybrid guy here, wide receiver / tight end, JJ McAfee at Georgia Southern. Who did you go with, Luke?
Quarterback stayed the same, Jordan McLeod at JMU. Running back, the same, Kamani Vidal, Troy. I did go with Marcus Carroll, Georgia Southern, for my RB2. His just was consistency. However, he did kill you on the playoffs with 13.7 versus App State. So, that's not great. You're probably sitting him against LSU. He goes off for 23.8. So more than likely you didn't get those benefit from those numbers, and then 7 against that stifling ODU defense. So probably all year, not too bad, but then definitely wasn't the greatest playoffs there for you. Wide receiver, agreed down the line. Colin Lacey, South Alabama. Elijah Surratt, JMU. Caleb Hood, Georgia Southern. Then tight end, I went with Eli Wilson, App State. So Eli Wilson, I was between Eli Wilson and Neil Johnson, but he got 34 receptions. Versus 30 receptions, 350 yards versus 383 yards, 5 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns. So essentially they are the same player. The only reason I went with Eli Wilson over him was Wilson only had 7 games under 8 points in full point PPR, while Neil Johnson had 9. So there's probably 2 games that, again, probably didn't kill you, but wasn't great. Neil did have a playoff run of 6.8 points, 13.4, and 21.7. Wilson had 0, 16.1, and 15.3. Again, he did give you that dud there in that first week of the playoffs, but when you consider your competition and what tight ends they have, if you're able to get over that 0, maybe they got an 8 spot. What's 8 points in college fantasy football? That can get made up pretty quick. You come back with a 16.1 and 15.3, and you're more consistent across the year. I'm going to take you Eli Wilson, App State.
Looking back at maybe some guys we could consider, the quarterback position, McLeod just kind of in his own league. I would say the next 2 after that would have been either Joey Aguilar at App State, who had a phenomenal year, and Darren Granger at Georgia State.
Think if Jalen Raynor had that job all year.
All year, yeah, he might have been up there. Yeah, absolutely. The main reason why I went with Mahdi over Carroll was the receiving work. But Carroll was a beast for much of the year. He kind of slowed down, like you said, at the end. Others to potentially consider: Rasheen Ali at Marshall and LaDamian Webb at South Alabama. Both had outstanding years. Or even Frank Gore Jr. At Southern Miss. He was Southern Miss, right? He was their offense.
And you didn't have quite the year like you have in years past where all of his points came in like these 3 games. Some 3 games, but that's like where all of his points. He had a pretty good year all year long.
At receiver, we picked the same 3 guys, but Sam Pinckney had a great year. Joey Hobart at Texas State, Robert Lewis at Georgia State. All had great years. Could have, easily we could have, picked those guys over our top 3. I think the top 3 were just so consistent, from a week in, week out basis.
I almost put Joey Hobart in there, but the only reason I went and I would have put him in there over Caleb Hood. The only reason I went with Caleb Hood is because he had 101 receptions.
Just PPR,
just like
man.
a baseline in PPR. That was great. Definitely, and he had less yards than Caleb Hood, but had more touchdowns. But I was trying to figure out a way to get Joey Hobart in there, and I couldn't figure it out. Colin Lacey, 91 receptions, led the league in yards, and then Elijah Surratt was second in yardage. I couldn't find a way to put him in there, but he would have been my next guy I would have probably put in there.
And then I think, we already covered it at tight end. It was, those kind of 3 guys, McAfee, Wilson, and then maybe Neil Johnson, but none of them like really stood out, significantly above the other.
And for those listening, not aware, Neil Johnson, University of Louisiana Lafayette. Yes. I don't think we mentioned that. So
no, we didn't. So that's going to kind of wrap it up this week for us, all conference teams. And like we said earlier, it's kind of the last show looking back at this past season. Starting next week, we're going to be going full bore with the transfer portal and G5 college football. We're planning to do it conference by conference. So we'll do one conference each week. And we're going to start off with the American. We're going to tell you who's leaving, who's coming, and talk about the any coaching changes there in terms of head coach, offensive or defensive coordinators. Anything you want to add, Luke?
Yeah, if you're listening, just metaphorically tear out that rearview mirror. We're no longer looking behind us. We are only looking forward. Don't need the rearview mirror any longer. 2023 is behind us. Bring on 2024. If you did not win your fantasy football championships, we're here to help because the G5 players can really, really help in, if you're in C2C leagues or if you're just in CFF leagues, like G5's where it's at. You can get these guys super late. A guy that I can think of that I'll be interested in was at Middle Tennessee State, Metcalf. Goes over to he transferred to Marshall. He was at Middle Tennessee State and he transfers over to Marshall. And Marshall is I believe they got a new offensive coordinator.
Did he go to Marshall?
Justice is gonna fact check me here.
For some reason, and I feel embarrassed because I should know this. I thought there were some rumors of him going to Old Dominion, but I don't think he ever fully committed there, right? Is it Marshall?
Now we're frantically checking, but there are some things that are happening that I think you can get a lot of these guys really late in your drafts, and we're going to be here.
No, you're right. You're right. He did commit to Marshall.
So, we're here to help. We'll be here during the year. Give you guys, the guys that are producing, tune into us for all your G5 needs.
And please rate, review, subscribe. We announced, I guess it was maybe the week before last or last time we went live, we were made aware of an issue with Apple Podcasts. That's been resolved. So that's been resolved now. So you can find all the episodes on Apple Podcasts. So please rate, review, and subscribe there or Spotify. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe, share our videos, and if you have any questions, hit us up in the DMs. You can find me at justice_2318.
You can find me at Probasco Luke. You can find the G5 Hive at G5 Hive. If there's something you want us to break down, or maybe there's a particular team you're interested in, I don't care what it is. Whatever you guys are interested in, let us know so we can craft a show around that. Because we're out here doing what we think you guys want, but you guys are the consumer. You tell us what you want.
Absolutely. We've been brainstorming ideas for the off season. And so if you guys have some ideas that you'd like to see us talk about or discuss, please pass those along, and we'll get those queued up for a future show. And thanks to everyone for their support, and we will see you next Monday.
Hot dog, hot dog, hot dog,